Hello everybody and welcome to another painting video as we go along our journey of painting all of the Nazgul of Dol Guldur. This is Khamul the Easterling, right? The bestest of all the Nazgul. He's going to be great. We have painted other ones we painted him either on stream or on other YouTube videos. So I do believe this one we painted on stream. He's also on YouTube, and then one of these two, I think this one we painted on stream, and then I think this one is also on YouTube. Now, I've got some other tutorials with how to paint the bases and how I've made those bases. Some of them are on the Patreon page, some of them are just here on YouTube. But we've moved pretty far along. I think Khamul is number 7, just a couple of more after him. And as you can see, we've got some of this little reflected firelight that's going on here. Now we're also using oil paints for these. And here, let me show you. They're just regular old artist oils here. Some are Winsor Newton, and some of them here. Let me get one of our Williamsburgs out here just to show you. There. So these two brands are very similar right here. Winsor Newton, Gamlin, very similar in price and quality. They're good. They're very good. This is going to cost you more, especially maybe overseas, but boy, you get a lot out of those. So what we're going to do is just briefly kind of go over what we've done here. We've just hit it with our Steino Res primer. I just brushed this on. Usually the base is not already painted, but here I thought it would just take less time, and I've already got several videos showing how that was done. And now I don't really do this much for myself anymore, but what you can do is actually take your oils paints and mix them with a high quality odorless thinner like this. And that's important because, well, it's better for you, and it's also better for the brushes and for the paint. And of course, all we're going to use is just this is it, just a little tiny water bottle cap full. That's all we're going to use. Now, as far as maybe some of the colors that I'm going to throw out here, I thought maybe you should just get a chance to see some of these. So here is Prussian blue. I don't usually do this. Now, again, this is me going out of the tubes. You could do that little mixing in the jars. I just don't have the time to do that. Now we got some indigo. This is from Winsor Newton. That's just going to go over here. Not really going to be using a whole lot of colors right here. It's not going to take all that many. We are going to get a little bit of our Indian yellow here. You could use Gamlin or Winsor Newton for that, so that's down here in the corner. I usually talk about the palette anyway, so why not go over it this way. Here's a little bit of Terra Rosa. That color, it's super cheap and it does everything. I use it for rust on vehicles. I use it for skin tone. Pretty much everything. Yeah. Some Van Dyke Brown here. This is from Williamsburg. That's going to go over here. And basically the Van Dyke Brown and the indigo together, well, that's going to make our black. So there's a little bit of Van Dyke Brown right there. Now this is a color that seems to be unique to Gamlin. This is called Asphaltum. It's also really good for things like horse fur and actually for darker rust. And even I've used it in a couple of darker skin tone videos as well. Now maybe we'll get some of our lighter colors here, like that radiant turquoise that I showed you, and also maybe a little bit of the radiant blue. Again, this is a Gamlin color right here. They're not terribly expensive. Not terribly expensive at all. I might even throw a little bit of the radiant violet over here. Usually the Egyptian violet ends up in that little corner right over there. Now I will throw just a little bit of if I can find some brilliant yellow pale right here. Now I'm just going to go with the radiant lemon. What the heck? So radiant lemon right here. It's going to go up here. Now I do have some white, and this is from Gamlin. It's called Quick Dry White, but seriously, it does not have any kind of, what is that called? The alkyds, which those are a little bit toxic and they make things dry just too fast, actually, for my liking. So we don't have a whole lot of colors out there. It's really not going to take that much. It's really not, because the blue and brown, again, together, that'll make our black. The asphaltum and the Van Dyke Brown and some of our white and the radiant violet, that's going to make our textured cloth right here. And our Prussian blue mixed with and again, I'm just going to find where my turquoise went, put that on the palette too. And I think we should be pretty good to go as far as brushes go. There's really nothing fancy here. We have some cheap old craft brushes here. This is usually what I start out, and this is what we're going to do next, the pre-glaze. Sometimes I like to have these filbert brushes. I have made these from craft brushes, just kind of clipping off the corners here to round those out. Then this is like a size 1 or 2 craft brush right here. And then we also use these short liner brushes. Cotman is good from Winsor Newton. They're about the same price in the $4 to $5 range. I've given up on sables. Just doesn't matter if I'm using acrylics or oils. I don't care. It has nothing to do with that. It's just you can't rely on the sables anymore. So again, what we're going to do is see little bits of firelight on occasion, some textured cloth. But next up, we are going to get into that pre-glaze. Let's do that next. For this thing that we call the pre-glaze, essentially what it is me putting darker colors over the top of this, preferably ones that we call staining colors. And I did this here, this was a Twitch session that I did. This was mostly just, I think that was Van Dyke Brown, some of the asphalt, and maybe a little bit of indigo in some areas. And then I wipe it away with some makeup sponges. They're actually in little wedges like this. Now you're going to want to get the latex-free sponges because I found out the hard way that if you get the ones that apparently are not latex-free, see how crumbly that is? Yeah, that's just not good on a whole lot of levels. This one right here, as you can see, it's a little bit sturdier, and I cut these up into smaller pieces because it's actually easier to use them like this. You also get, well, a lot more out of each sponge, not that they're expensive. I just get them off of Amazon. And you also tend to make a little bit less of a mess, and you can get into more targeted areas. And I think you'll see that more as I start to slap some of this on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to use as much thinner maybe as I might ordinarily. So this is just that same thinner in a bottle right here. I will be talking about cleaning brushes and all that other kind of stuff over the course of the video here. None of it is terribly earth-shattering. I can tell you that right now. Since I have the base already painted, I am going to do this with not as much of the thinner as I ordinarily might do because it will spatter a bit. This is similar to the shaded base coat that I used to do with acrylics. And even that had a tendency to spatter a little bit. See, even there, a little bit good on the base. No big deal because it just kind of looks like staining. Since this is a Van Dyke brown right here, I'm going to get a little bit of that asphaltum in here that's a bit more on the reddish side than our asphaltum. Now we're going to be doing some pretty reflective metal here. It's almost like a shinier sky earth non-metallic metal. I'm kind of tempted to almost go with my Easterling colors on him. Oh, so darn tempted. If I had another one of him, I would be inclined to do something like that. Now, sponge time. I got these guys here. I'm going to take a smaller one now. And you're going to see that a lot of it does get wiped away, but some of it does get left behind. And you say, well, what about just doing a zenithal primer? Well, first of all, I'm going to be doing a couple of different colors here, right? Mostly indigo, so that's sort of bluish gray elsewhere on here. The other thing, too, is when you do a zenithal priming, well, all you do is paint over it. The goal here is to actually be painting with this. And you can already see that even with some of this wiped away, there's still some left behind. Now, I don't really care what the primer is as far as color goes. It could be more of a green, it could be more of a yellow. I've even had it be orange or pink. You just don't want it to be super dark because then it's really hard to see what you've done with your pre-glaze. That's pretty much it. White tends to be a little bit too stark. Okay, here's one of our smaller little craft brushes here. Again, about a size 1 or 2-ish. Not quite sure what I wanted to do with the horns. Do I want those to be metal? I don't know. Don't have to really decide right now. I think I'll just hit them with some of the Van Dyke Brown. And if I want to change my mind, I can do that. Because with the oils, let's say you change your mind, I could just take those makeup sponges and just wipe it all away. It's all gone. Here we go. The other thing, too, about this pre-glaze, And if you've seen some of my other videos, or especially if you've seen the Patreon videos, well, you'll know that depending on how you orchestrate your pre-glaze, there's some folks, especially with things like more skeletal stuff like ostearchs or whatever, or even some, shall we say, more grimdark stuff, they've said, wow, you had me at pre-glaze. That would have been good enough. Or pre-glaze with a little bit of dry brushy stuff over the top of it for a little bit of light or whatever. And they said, you know what? I would have been good with that. That would have worked for me. So that is something else to consider too, that with the oil method here like this, maybe you don't necessarily just stop, but let's say you don't have enough time to continue for the day, it's going to dry or whatever. Well, it'd be good enough to play with. Then you can maybe go back again and work on it some more. I've certainly done that. You saw that Easterling guy. I think there's one around here somewhere that I. Where is he? He's right around here somewhere. Oh well, I thought I had him, but the pre-glaze had all dried, and I was still able to utilize that even a couple of days later in another session. All right, I'm going to say that's good enough there. Where's my original brush here that's got some of the Van Dyke brown in it? And I'll just hit these horns right here. I mean, they've got very much a horn-like texture to them, so I think maybe not with the metal there. All right, I think we're good. I think we're good. We're going to hit this now again with our sponges. Got to be kind of gentle here. This is a Forgeworld miniature, and, well, it's Forgeworld resin, which tends to be kind of on the brittle side and easily breakable. So we're trying to, I'm doing more of a pokey thing right here, just trying to get at some of what's left behind there. But you can see how much darker that is than the original primer. Now, let's say if I wanted to lighten that up a little bit, could have mixed, I don't know, some of the light flesh color or some of the white in with that. It's just a Steiner's primer. You can airbrush it on if you want. It's designed for airbrushes. For me, it's just so much easier to brush it on, especially these days because I'm not actually priming dozens of figures at once the way I used to. It also works really well on terrain. I have to say that. Okay, so there we go. There's a bit of pre-glaze right there. And nothing super fancy, just a couple of different colors, but he certainly looks a whole lot different than he did when we started, right? With that, I think we actually got one right here that's mostly about the same. So there's your difference. Look at that. Significant difference. What we're going to do now is we're going to go back in, especially maybe some of the armor and the cloak here, and try to establish some midtones and some lights. Let's do that next. Now comes the fun part where we start to add some of those lighter tones. And just take a note here. When I say dry brush, I mean dry brush. I mean, there's very, very little paint on the brush. You could even, in theory, take a paper towel like this and get rid of some of the paint, because remember, we've got wet paint that's already on here, and it's already starting to mix. I can see the darker Van Dyke brown working its way into that. It happens fast. It happens really fast. And I just took some of that radiant violet, and that's on the brush. What I'll do is that I think it's probably going to be at the, it could be at the beginning and the end. Little list of colors for you. Nothing super fancy, but just because there's only what, 3, 6, 9. I think there's 11 colors out here. That's pretty typical. That's very typical. Not a lot. If I'm doing some object source lighting or maybe true metallic metals or something that just involves a more complicated color scheme, maybe there'll be 2, 3, 4 more out there. But aside from that, that's about it. So again, a very light touch on the brush too. I mean, look at this. Not even using my thumb with that. Very, very light touch here. And you can see in no time flat. Look at see how that dark color on the end of the brush versus on this side? That's what we're talking about. And I think that's all cloth. So he doesn't actually have as much armor on him. Now, I'm not actually cleaning out the brush. All I'm doing is just taking a paper towel and kind of smushing as much of that out of there as I can, because now I'm going to grab some of these radiants here. This is the radiant turquoise. And it's a dry brush action, but the nifty part of the oils is that it's just not going to have that dry brush look to it. It's that sort of graininess that you might see with the acrylics, because it's pretty much just dry paint over dry paint, whereas here, technically, this is wet into wet. But there might be some folks that say, well, yeah, okay. They might be already thinking, maybe this will just work as is. That's all I really need. However, we're going to do some more. It's not going to be a super long video. It won't be one of the 2-hour variety or anything like that. Very light approach to it here. Very, very light. And even now, some of the pre-glaze is mixing with the paint that's on the brush. I can see it. I can see it on the end of the brush. I can see it when I go back to the palette to go get some fresh color. Spiky bits over there. All right. Get rid of that fuzz that's on the end of the brush there. I think this is, okay, that's all metal. All right, there we go. Oh, almost forgot his feet there. Let's see if we can't go maybe a smidge lighter in some spots on his robe. There we got some of the white, some of the violet there. And I guess in some circles they would almost call this a bit of sketching, but look at how that just blends, huh? See that? It just blends straight away. No layers. Hashtag no layers. No need to. You know what? I'm gonna go with some of the Radiant Lemon. It's gonna mix with the Asphaltum here, just to get a little different color on these horns. I don't think I want them to be too light. Don't think we want these to be too light. Yeah, I don't think we... Ordinarily, I tend to paint things like that a little bit on the lighter side. If you look at some of my dwarf goat rider painting videos, I know I have a whole series of those on the Patreon page. Where's that? Here it is. That's my original pre-glaze brush. It's going to come back, and I'm going to use that to do a little bit of blending too, because why not? Why not? I'm going to reflect a little bit of that onto the helmet, because if it's shiny, how is it not reflecting stuff like that? And then, look at this, I can even take my blending brush in here and soften some of these edges, maybe take some of this down a little bit. That's the fun part about the oils. You'll see more of that as we go along. As we go along, now I'm going to maybe establish a few more lights here on the metal. Taking some of the white, mixing it with some of the turquoise. Just want to make sure you can see what it is that we've got going here. I don't think we're going to give him any kind of glowing eyes or whatever. Fun as it is to do stuff like that, I don't think that's what we'll do. The tricky thing is going to be this mace, because we have light coming from some different angles. It's it's curved. There's a whole bunch of shapes right here, right? All these prongs like this. So that will make it somewhat interesting, to say the least, to deal with this thing. Okay, yeah, I think I still need to get a little light on the end of this thing. Almost forgot about that little belt right there. Now you can do some glazing with the oils. A couple of things about that. It's not going to be like a traditional, say, miniature type glaze with the acrylics, because your underneath layers aren't going to be dry. If you let all the stuff dry in between, well, then you can sort of do more of that traditional glaze like you're used to, where you brush it on. But here, if we want to do any kind of glazing thing, it's going to have to be what's more like a pin line wash, where you essentially just touch the brush to it and then let the brush do all the rest. Here, we need to start to think about stuff like this, where you have a light area, a dark area here. We need to reflect this metal off of this. It's all about, with especially the shinier the metal is, any kind of metal is going to have some sort of reflection. I mean, it just has to. It's a very hard surface, and that's going to have some reflections to it. Now, I've got tons and tons of videos on the rest of my Easterlings. I'll probably throw some links in the description to some other, well, certainly the other Nazgul painting videos, but I will certainly try to find some links to my Twitch sessions where I've painted some of my converted Easterlings. What I want to try to start doing is some army showcase videos where it's not really painting. It's not a painting video, a tutorial. It's more of, well, here is the army. Here's what it took to make this army. Here's where things were converted. Here's where things were maybe 3D printed. Because I think that could have some value. Because, well, whether it's a commission thing or if it's just for me, the figures that I paint, they are designed to be played with. Doesn't matter how elaborate they are or whatever. And of course, the oils have a huge advantage when it comes to miniatures for gaming, because they are rugged. My goodness, they are rugged. So you can see we've pretty quickly established some of our, and these aren't the lightest lights either, but we've got some decent lights now out here. It's a start. It's a start. Definitely not where we're going to end up, but, and there might be some folks that say, gee whiz, that's it? That's all I got to do? Yeah, that works for me. Good enough. That's all I need. And if that's the case, well, all the better. Now I'm going to take, again, one of those blending brushes here, and you'll see what's going to happen with this. We're just going to take that. It's just a brush with no paint on it. So see, we've got a hard line right there. Can make sure there's no paint on it. Look what happens here. All of a sudden, now it's not a hard edge anymore. Same over here with this thing. That is just such a powerful tool with the oils. You wouldn't believe how much time that saves you. Wouldn't believe just how much more chill and relaxing it makes the whole painting process, for that matter. Now, Prussian blue, we were talking about that. We got some of it here. I think this might be the best example. You can see on the top of his helmet right there, some of that Prussian blue. Yeah, there we go. And a little bit here too. And then remember, we have to remember we've got that firelight. Think of it as maybe some torches on a wall a fair distance away from him. Not close, but a distance away. Oh, and by the way, these the videos here, they're all just real time. There's no voiceover speed ramping or anything like that. You see every brush stroke. There's nothing where I go, oh, okay, see you in about an hour, and then it's magically done. No, that's not quite how that works. It's not how that works. That's to me, those kind of videos aren't helpful to me, so I figure they're not terribly helpful for you guys either. So just trying to get some reflected light there on the interior of some of these facets of his mace. Let's get some on the feet here. And now I'm going to just throw a couple of smaller areas here of lights on his cloak, and already starting to think maybe about the textured cloth. It's a pretty darn simple process. I'm just going to kind of do these horizontal brushstrokes like this. And the reason I'm just kind of getting into this here is because what I would like to do is after I get this done here, I just want to go in and work on the cloak and get some of that textured cloth in there with some of the darker colors. Because we've pretty much established that mid-tone. You say, what the heck is a mid-tone? Well, it's sort of that area between your shadows and your highlights, which is most of everything. That's really where most of the action actually happens, is in that part of it. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to let this just set for 5-10 minutes, and then we're going to get back and we're going to start doing some of that textured cloth, and we're going to get to that next. We're going to work in some of this texture onto the cloak, and you can see there's a lot of this horizontal banding going on here. It's pretty darn simple. It's mostly just, well, Van Dyke brown. We're going to thin it down, though. I have to say, we are going to thin this down a little bit. And let's have at it. The other important aspect of this, and it ties into that advantage of the oils and the blending ability. If I look at this and go, boy, that's maybe a little too much texture, I take that blending brush you saw earlier, and I just wipe some of it away. Not all of it, but effectively I can just sort of tone it down. That actually kind of works nice with, say you're doing tattoos or whatever, and you want it to look a little more subdermal. You just essentially take that blending brush and you just kind of take a little bit of the edge off of your tattoo design, and that just tends to make it look like it's under the skin instead of just, well, painted on. So I think you can see already. Now maybe this won't be textured too. We'll just do the cloak here, and I guess you might be able to see the other thing I'm doing here. See that? That's a little bit of a watercolor type of a trick right there. Something that, oh gosh, I hate using the whole technical term thing, but they called it negative painting. You're sort of painting what's not there, right? You know, this thing, it's not really part of what we're painting, but look how that just showed up a whole lot more by virtue of what we just added here. So I hope that some of these little things, I try to maybe toss out a little jargon like that once in a while when it's pretty darn straightforward what the heck it means. Like the mid-tone thing. There's no big mystery about that. It's a term that pretty much just applies to darn near most of the colors that you're going to see. Yeah, so white and black, those are mid-tones. Really dark blue, really dark violet, yeah, not a mid-tone. But stuff like a lot of your greens and reds and such, well, those are going to be mid-tones. Browns can be. And when you think about it, very little of your colors would be shadow colors and very little would be highlight colors. Everything else falls in the middle, hence the whole mid-tone thing. We could put dust spatters on this, mud spatters, or whatever you want to call it. You can put any of that stuff on there. Now here also, this not going to do the texture on that, so I'm going to save the texture here, mostly because I think that would be too much of the same thing, too much. And we might even let that get just a smidge darker as well. Remember the blending brush I was telling you about? Well, that's going to come in handy right about here. Look at that. Poof. There it is. Blending the easy way. I know that tends to be the one thing that jumps into everybody's mind when the conversation turns to oil paint. Blending, blending. True thing, yeah. But it can be done in more ways, and well, the way you're not going to really want to do it is in those layers. Remember the whole hashtag no layers thing? That's a thing. You're just going to slap some colors on there, take that blending brush and blend them together, push them around. This one, I don't really get to do it very much. We don't have too many large open surfaces for that, but gee whiz, there's ample enough videos on the channel here that show that very thing. Yes, there's plenty of videos that show just how you can approach take a big old blob of color, well, maybe not a big old blob of color, but a blob of color. You put that on your miniature. You put another one next to it. It could be red and green. It could literally be mixing red and green together. Now here, I need to reflect some of this onto the metals here. So just don't mind me while I put a little bit of that over there onto the metals. I might darken this down a little more. And I might even, remember we were talking about mixing the indigo and the Van Dyke brown together. Well, that's what we're doing here. To just essentially make a darker color. I could just, you could take black, but in general, black tends to be kind of a dead color. There's really not much that happens with that. So here again, see, we just painted a line right there. Now I'm going to take that blending brush. I'm going to push around these edges. And all of a sudden I see it, here, let's take this and see, we just soften up that, oh, look at how soft that is. No layers, right? I just went in there with a really dark color next to something that was sort of kind of light. And in no time flat, poof. Doesn't take very long, I'm telling you. Also, too, I guess there's overthinking. Overthinking is something. I see people that they'll take a 10 or a 3-step process and turn it into a 50-step process. I'm not quite sure what the desire is behind that. Never really figured that out, but it just seems to happen. I don't really have super clearly defined steps. Even with stuff like this, I would be painting all 9 of these guys at once. I wouldn't just be painting one of these guys. The only reason I'm painting these, well, essentially individually, or maybe in 2s or something like that on the Twitch channel, is just because it's a little bit easier to show in a tutorial form. That's why I try to do the army painting series for the Patreon page, as we get some of that real dark color here now into the cloak. That's the indigo mixed with the Van Dyke brown, which essentially creates a black here. The army painting series, that lets me really show the advantage of working on just a whole bunch of figures all at once. So yeah, you thought we had the darkest dark there. No, we could probably even get a little bit darker than this. That's another one of the advantages that the oils do offer, and that is insanely rich darks. Well, the color is richer just in general. There's been a few miniatures that I've had a chance to essentially paint the same exact miniature in the same color scheme, one with oils, one with acrylics, and actually there is one of those on the YouTube channel, I know that. And I couldn't believe, I knew there would be a difference. I thought, okay, there's a difference. I didn't realize there's a difference, as in, my goodness, you could see it from space. The difference between the two, just how dark the darks were with the oils and how almost faded the acrylics looked by comparison. I was stunned, couldn't believe it. I was really, really, really amazed. All right, what do we got going on here? Maybe darken that down even a little bit more. Van Dyke Brown, Indigo, the two together are going to make something that's, if not black, pretty darn close to it. Indigo is a pretty cheap color. Van Dyke Brown, not an expensive color either. And the other benefit too is that those two colors, as far as staining goes, well, ivory black is very weak when it comes to that staining process that we talk about, or staining properties anyways. Now that I've got my darks there, I'm going to see if I can't find a couple of lighter colors. Now we're also going to switch things up just a smidge. As you can see, I just grabbed some of the Radiant Lemon. It's kind of a yellowish color. Why did I do that? Just to make sure we don't get too boring with this color right here. You can see I'm also adding in, trying to be a little bit strategic here, adding in a few little bits of texture here and there. And that might be something we also use here on these horns. We'll probably lighten up this area up here just a little bit more. Again, I don't want to go too crazy with that. I thought I was going to be using more of my Perlene Black. I just left it off the palette. I know it's in the opening shot there, where I try to show the different paint colors that I use. But I just wanted to keep the list as simple as I could. Really keep it down to a minimum. I don't like to use that phrase, oh gosh, what is it called? Limited palette or something like that, because, well, it sounds limited. It's really not. There's so much we could do. I haven't even messed with the Terra Rosa yet, which I'll probably also get up here and on the horns, just to create some different colors. And let's say we wanted to get some more like rust or corrosion or something like that onto the armor. Well, that's where your Terra Rosa would come in. Now, another thing I want to mention here is that this is getting to be a little bit thicker paint. Unlike the acrylics where, well, the previous layer is dry, so who the heck cares? This is not. This is wet over wet. And the layer that I'm putting on here right now, well, that is thicker than those previous layers. I just throwing that out there. Throwing that out there. What I'm going to do over here now is do something like this. I'm going to take some of that Radiant Lemon. We're going to mix that with the Terra Rosa. And I'm just going to throw a little couple of hints of that right here. It'll be a subtle little color difference between this and this over here. Boy, and in some small way it will sort of mimic. Here's one of my conversions that I did, so you can see this is the color scheme that I have for my Easterling army. And again, what I'm going to try and do over the coming months, now that I have several Lord of the Rings armies, and I'm creating many more. Basically, they're going to be army showcase videos where I show the figures, talk about the figures, what went into the either the conversion or basing or painting of them, and then potentially point to you where there might be some tutorials about said miniatures, because I've always wanted to do that. It's just since I'm mostly painting figures for other people, I've never get to have my own standing armies, so to speak. But that has changed thanks to things like Twitch and even the Patreon pages. See, there's a color difference here. Now look at this as a tiny touch of reddishness to it, whereas over there, more of a yellowish, greenish tone almost. So a subtle little difference right there. Not a bunch, just a little. Now, how's about go back to it? Some of the darks up here again. Don't want to lose sight of those. All right, the horns. Some. Where's my? That's just somewhat mixing it with the radiant lemon. This is also relatively thick. And I'm really just looking to catch a couple of the edges here, but it's not edge highlighting. You can see it's broken up. Why? Because I'm actually, well, there's texture here. There's texture trying to indicate that without going too crazy. Sometimes suggesting texture, especially on a guy who's only an inch tall, is better than actually trying to paint it all in. To me, I don't really like doing the textured cloth because, again, the texture that's being painted on a 1 inch tall miniature is probably heavier than the texture would be on a full-size human. I kind of prefer it more on, say, busts or 70-something millimeter or 100 millimeter sculpts, larger scale things. To me, it makes more sense there, but boy, people go crazy for the textured cloth. So I thought, let's do some textured cloth for folks. Although, try and make it a little easier for them. All right, so we're going to say good enough there on that texture. We're going to let that set before I bring in the blending brush and smush it around a little bit. Next up, we're going to go back into our metallic stuff here. We're going to try and get some of that reflected firelight. We still have to get our brightest lights, and then maybe some other colors in there too. Again, where's my example here? Here he is. So you can see all those little orangey lights in some of those different facets. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to maybe even add some of these darks, and we're going to do that next. I have a little bit of that fluorescent orange out on the palette. Now that is a color that I made myself with just taking the Green Stuff World powdered pigments and mixing it with some linseed oil. That's all it took. I actually have several videos on those on the YouTube channel on kind of how I make those. And then I've also, well, gee whiz, I've used them dozens of times in other tutorials, even here on the YouTube channel. All right, so see, we're trying to just poke a little bit of that here, not much. It can't be a whole lot, just a little touch here and there. Mostly, you can see I've chosen some darker areas there. We're going to throw some more darks into some of this. See, that might be a little too thin. Got a little bit too runny there. And that's where we talk about those pin line washes. Oils, well, they've got true capillary action, not the pretend capillary action like you see maybe with acrylics or was that the contrast paints and stuff. Yeah, that's not real capillary action. That's just kind of sort of there. Not really. That's why oils get used for your vehicle painting and especially the weathering part of it and such. And I'm going to do the same over here. I'm kind of cheating a little bit here because it's not just lighter, but we've changed that color a little bit. It's got some orange in it now. Just a little bit here and there. I don't want to go crazy with it. Just some every so often. And sometimes you just have to go back in with some darks too. You must have dark to show the light. And I don't want him to look like he's standing right next to a fire or a torch. Again, we have plenty of videos. This one I do believe is on the YouTube channel here. We have plenty of videos talking about actual, just genuine object source lighting. We have tons of that. This is just, again, to maybe suggest that there's a distant torch somewhere providing just a little bit of light on him. Just a hint of it. More of the, again, just a couple of areas here. Now, when it comes to the brush cleaner, I'll show you that at the end of the, just maybe a final details or a final thoughts segment or something like that. If you want to clean any oil paint that gets on your hands, you can see there's not exactly a whole lot of it on my hands here. The dishwashing soap works really, really well. Simple, basic dishwashing soap. It will be just fantastic. Dawn gets out the grease. And it'll certainly work for getting your hands clean. Okay, now we were talking about that pin line wash. I'm just going to throw some of my thinner here. And that's the indigo. But boy, you can see how thin and liquid that is. And see what I did there? I just touched the brush to it. That's all I did. Touching the brush to it, that's all. Nothing else. But now I need to go a little darker. Ooh, that's going to be too thin. And I'm going to take some of the Van Dyke Brown as well. So up here we have just a whole bunch of, well, mid-tones, maybe some lights. We don't have any actual darks. Let's do that here. That looks a little more like what I wanted. Again, I'm going to strengthen some of my darks over here. What that also does is it sharpens up edges. We got to have sharp edges here. Yeah, if you don't have sharp edges, it's just not going to read or translate as metal. Or let's say you're doing something with ice shards or whatever. That's a similar situation. You're going to want to have really, really hard edges. So I'm going to try and get here on the mace before I come back in here with anything that's lighter. I'm going to actually try and make sure I've got some hard edges there. That is so important, because after a while you can only make things so light. You can only make things so dark too. Aha, look at that. See how that just spreads out so easily? All right. I'm going to take some of, this is the Radiant Blue, which is a little bit more on the reddish side here. We need a little bit of light coming underneath there too. It's once again just another slight change to the color. Now let me see if I can get some really light lights here on the armor and on the mace, because we put in our deepest darks, and hopefully now This will give us that little extra bit of shine, but spearing it, it's like anything else. Chipping, rust, mud spatter. Too much of that is just, it's too much, and it kind of overpowers everything. It's tempting to go and put a lot of it on there because it's fun to do and it does look really neat. But then it starts to be too much, and it can be there. There's a very short distance before it goes from wow, that's neat, to oh my gosh, that's too much. The distance between those 2 points is shorter than you think. We have to get our lightest lights up here too. And I might need to throw some of the, well, speaking of mid-tones, maybe some of the Prussian blue in a couple of spots. Like I said, ideally I'm working on all 9 of these race at the same time. Why? Well, you're actually maximizing the efficiency of the oils, but also too, one thing the oils kind of do sometimes is speed you up. You get really excited, you're blending, you're mixing, you're doing all this stuff, and then you kind of go a little bit overboard, right? You just get a little bit too excited, and the next thing you know, you've overblended something, and that will happen with the oils when you're in those early days. Don't get too disappointed by that. It's a touch sort of a thing. There's really no defined this, if you do this all the time, whatever. There's a lot of differences between the oil paints too, consistency wise, and there are differences between oil paint brands. It's that way with acrylic miniature paints too. Reaper, Pro Acryl, Games Workshop, Vallejo, if you were to take those paints, they would be radically different consistency wise from each other. Heck, even individual paint lines have colors that will have very different consistencies. It's just something you have to factor in. Now, see, that line didn't work quite the way I wanted it to, so I'm just going to take my blending brush and we'll just get rid of that. Boom, it's gone. The offending thing is gone now. It's all gone. And just trying to pick up a couple of brighter lights where I can. And by the way, this whole thing is pretty much just going to be about an hour of painting-ish, something like that. I don't think that's too shabby. At least for these results right here, I think people would say, wait a minute, that's the kind of result that I could potentially get in about an hour of painting. Sign me up for that. And as I said, I've got the Twitch channel. I would suggest you go look at that because there's an awful lot of previous episodes that are all saved as full on. It's almost like a YouTube channel. Now, disadvantage, I can't put them in any kind of playlists. They're just in chronological order, but they're all there. And if you want to take the techniques further and learn more about all this, the advantage of the oils, suggest doing the Patreon page thing, especially the Army Painter Pledge level, since, well, that'll get you every single tutorial video that I've ever filmed, going back almost 9 years now. And that's going to cover terrain as basing. It's more than just, non-metallic metals and object source lighting and the usual things. I try to cover as many things as I can. If you're first starting out with the oils, I also suggest that you just do some mixing. Just take a piece of cardboard or something like, or illustration board or whatever, and just mix some colors together. You'll get used to the consistency of the paint. You'll get used to actually blending it together without having it on a miniature. So I think there's some advantages there. Maybe the top of some of these need to get just a bit lighter. Again, I don't want to. Also, too, on the feet, sometimes I had a habit of highlighting the feet to the same degree as maybe I would have highlighted the top of his head or something. Not a great idea. Now here's the place where I've got to, I think, come back in with some darks, and we have to sharpen up this edge. Again, we talk about edge contrast. Right there, bam. See what that just did? That sharpened up this whole line there. Made that nice and sharp. I just toned this down a little bit. And I need some reflected light I see over here. Maybe not. This is more, I was going to say, wait a minute. The reflected light here really shouldn't be, it shouldn't have too much blue in it. I would like it to have more of a grayish look. Why? Because it's reflecting the floor. Metal needs reflected light. Haven't we already talked about that several times? Now my firelight right there. See how I've got the darks around the firelight there? I don't feel like I have enough darks around that firelight here. So I'm going to take some of the asphaltum, some of the terra rosa, and I feel like that's maybe a bit better. Yeah, I think, I don't know, something I like a little better about that. A little bit of reflected light here on the horns. And I think with this, what I'm going to do is, we're going to do a little bit of a final thought sort of a thing. One of the things we're also going to do is just take that blending brush and maybe soften up some of the texture on that robe. I think that's another thing that we'll do. And I'll show you that brush cleaner and a little bit of a review on some of the stuff that we've used. Again, I strongly recommend the high quality odorless thinner, not that cheap, nasty dime store stuff. Because the cheap, nasty dime store stuff is just, well, not going to work, and it's just a waste of money. Might as well spend just a bit more and get something that's actually going to work for you. All right, so next up, some final thoughts and a little bit of a review. Here's a little review for you on some of the stuff. Now, this Mona Lisa sub-brand, Speedball is the primary brand. This is really nice stuff. I've gotten this on Amazon, on Dick Blick, at Michael's. There's so many places that have this. Say in Europe, you could maybe use the MIG Ammo odorless thinner or the AK Interactive. Those are pretty similar to this. To me, actually, this has no smell whatsoever. Those other two have maybe a little bit of a fragrance to them. And now we've got this over here, brush cleaner. Oh, look at this. It's for dried acrylic as well. My wife uses this for acrylic paints every single day. It's gentle on your brushes. It's a brush restorer too. And it's not hazardous. There's no vapor. And it's not too expensive. It's just from Winsor Newton. So you should be able to get that in a lot of different places. Now what I'm going to do here is some of that. See here on the cloth there. And I'm not doing this. I'm just doing this. It's like an up and down, it's just tapping on it. That's all I'm doing. Very gently tap. You can see I'm taking some paint away. All that it's doing is softening this up a little bit. This is another thing that you can't do with the acrylics, right? So I'm just literally poking at it like this. That's all I'm doing here. Yeah. There we go. Now I have to make sure that I clean out paint from that brush because it is picking up the paint every single time I do this. All right, here, let's get the, again, couple little taps here and there. That's all it really takes. And then here, I'm just going to soften this up. It's something that I call the brushstroke management phase. Because people ask me, say, how the heck do you not have a bunch of brushstrokes on the miniature like I do? And one of the main reasons I don't is because I let the paint set. It's not dry. 5, 10, 15-ish minutes, whatever. You go back and you do what I'm kind of doing here. It does wonders for getting rid of those weird little brush strokes that can pop up. Really does. Now I'm going to come back again. Some of my little final things here. I see there's some areas where I really need to reinstall some of my really deep darks here. There's some edges along here that are just kind of, well, not really there anymore. Same thing on the mace here. I think we lost a few. And I might get to get some more lights up there on top of his helmet, I think. This kind of armor is really, really weird to paint, I have to say. I mean, it's nifty. It looks really unique. It can also be a bit of a pain to deal with. Having painted many, many, many Easterlings over the years, metal, resin, and now some digital prints, which that's been really interesting and fun. All right, where's my Prussian blue mixed with some white there? It's not quite like your kind of standard issue Easterling helmet, and there's our the helmet light reflecting, or the helmet reflecting on itself. The shinier the armor, seriously, it will reflect off of itself. It's like a mirror. And that is, especially if it's the shiny stuff, right? Going back in with some of the lighter lights, especially on upper reaches of this armor. It's a little rough, just even as far as the way it's sculpted, so we're trying to do the best I can with it. Or cast. That's why I really do enjoy the 3D printed stuff. So mold lines going through things like, well, armor, or through hands, or through fur, or any of that sort of stuff. Let's see what I can do here on this mace. Bring that light all the way down to the edge there. We don't really have anything. I think you can see what I'm doing here right along that edge. That's better. That's something I see that I was kind of missing. This is why I paint the entire figure all at once, not just painting the face and nothing else, because you get more context that way. It can be very easy to make something way too light, way too dark. If all I was painting was just his helmet and then painted the rest of this later, as you can imagine, there might be some things where all of a sudden his helmet's looking really dark, or gee, that helmet looks really light all of a sudden. Okay, I think we've got that pretty well set. Again, I don't want to do everything now. Is just all I'm trying to do is maybe get a little more just rendering out of some stuff, a little more detail, a little more polish. But that now comes down to, what do you have time for? Does it really matter to you? May not even matter to you at all. You say, whatever, that's just fine, that's good enough. Or if you're doing it for a painting contest or something like that, well, maybe that's different. Maybe you will go all out and spend a whole bunch of extra time. All right. Yeah, that works. I think that I got just enough of the light here on these horns. I don't want to do too much more. Don't want those to stand out. Just trying to, again, suggest that a little bit of texture there. Teensy bit of the texture. Maybe hit some darks in there. And then a little bit of a lighter reflection on the helmet where the horns are. Just like that. Good enough. So there we go. He will join our collection. The 9 have now become the 7. It's getting there. It's getting towards the 9. We're coming close. Again, I will try and link some of the other videos. I know this was a Patreon video, but I do have one video of, I think, just on the YouTube channel, me painting these. So I'll try and link that one for you too, so that you can see that easily enough. And links to the Twitch channel. Again, maybe do just follow that and catch a live session now and then. I'm always answering lots of questions during the entire session. That's kind of the whole point of doing that. And actually, a lot of the things that I run across in the Twitch session, as far as questions or whatever, I'll say, well, that question keeps coming up a lot. I think I need to do a tutorial video on that. So yeah, sometimes the tutorials will just be based on frequently asked questions in the chat on the Twitch channel. And it would be very helpful to, the usual, the like and the subscribe and the ring the bell and all that kind of stuff. It does really help the channel a lot. It certainly does. And hopefully this is helpful. Maybe even not for painting Khamul or painting Nazgul or whatever, but just textured cloth, or maybe a little bit of non-metallic metal. So thanks again, everybody. I'll catch you on the next video.